Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. My name is Bobby Hawk, and in a couple of moments, you'll be able to watch Opher Rom and myself talk about the history of Israel or some of the things about Israel that we find interesting. Now, all of our podcasts, the entire first season, 12 episodes, were recorded in June of 2023. The goal was to release one each month, July of 2023 through June of 2024, with the possibility of a season 2. We've released 4 episodes so far, and as I record this, it is now October of 2023. Israel is unfortunately in war, and there's unprecedented conflict in the region. So we're going to release episodes 5 through 12 over an 8-day period here in October. Again, as you listen to these, you'll probably notice a couple of things. They were meant to be released monthly, so you may hear us refer to that. We also refer to trips to the Holy Lands and the safety that we've experienced in the past. However, that's changed. I personally have had to cancel 3 trips over the next several months because of the conflict that's taking place in Israel. So I'm going to ask you to consider that as you listen or watch the podcast. Know that those were pre-recorded in June and understand that we're releasing all 8 episodes that are remaining now. So whether you're watching episode 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12, they'll all be shared during this month of October as you learn more about the history of Israel, the conflict that's created for generations now, for thousands of years. It may help you even understand what's currently going on there. And also, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to pray. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for those who have lost loved ones, who are experiencing the devastation of their country, and pray that peace throughout that region would come quickly. In the meantime, I hope this is informational for you. I hope it's helpful as you learn more about an overview of Israel with Opher Rom. Now here we go. Welcome to OPHERcoming the Odds, a podcast on YouTube and also through your audio listening devices.
Yes.
But if you're on YouTube, you can actually see the amazing, talented Opher Rom. And Opher, we named the podcast after you.
Very honored.
So, because we couldn't find anybody else willing to agree to sit down and discuss how Israel has overcome the odds historically. Not true. Opher's the best guide in Israel, and I take trips over there only if Opher is available to guide. But you book out years in advance.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully, yes.
Yes.
I tell you who helps us do that, though, is Center for Holy Land Studies, and the Center for Holy Land Studies, or the chls.org, is an incredible group because they help facilitate pastors like me taking trips over to the Holy Lands, and then Opher takes us around. And one of the exciting things we get out of this is Opher's bus talks. So those are the conversations between sites where Opher fills us in, and we're actually on episode 9 of our first season, and we're doing an Opher view of Israel. So we started way back in the book of Genesis.
We did, in the beginning.
In the beginning. We've covered through 8 episodes so far, quite a bit of history. And so in our 9th episode, we're going to jump back in, and we're kind of we're in the 20th century by now when it comes to Israel. So we're getting towards modern Israel, but there's still some things that happen very significantly, especially in the 20th century. It's still Palestine at this point.
Yes.
Let's pick up the story.
We stopped with World War I beginning. We're talking basically 1914, 1918. And even before the war is over, the British and the French understand that they're about to win, and they're dividing up the Ottoman Empire between themselves. This division sticks. The League of Nations is going to be created after World War I, and they're going to ratify these divisions that the French and the British did to the Ottoman Empire. And it turns out that the land of Palestine, which was a part of the Turkish Empire, is now under the British mandate. What is a mandate? A mandate is the idea that the British have the right to rule politically, but they're supposed to help the local population, not just in Palestine, but everywhere that they have a mandate on after World War I. They're supposed to help the local population create a state of their own, learn how to rule themselves. And this is true for what we call today India and Pakistan. This is true for Iraq and Iran and Lebanon and Jordan and Syria and Egypt and all the other parts of the Ottoman Empire that completely disintegrated. We either have French mandate or British mandate. And the land of Palestine, which, by the way, includes modern-day Israel and modern-day Jordan, is under the British mandate. And now we're going to be about 30 years in the running of a British mandate period here. At first, the Jews were actually thrilled because at the end of World War I, the British, I guess he was the Foreign Affairs Minister. This is an official person from from Great Britain that gives us a statement. It's called the Balfour Declaration, in which it says very, very clearly that the British government, or His Majesty, is still His Majesty's government, sees it with a favorable eye to help the Jewish people establish a state in biblical Palestine, or biblical Israel. What is biblical Israel? Both sides of the Jordan River. And this declaration was actually, again, ratified in 1922, if I'm not mistaken, by the League of Nations. So the Jews are ecstatic. Their political wheeling and dealing, as we talked about in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, is finally materializing. The world is starting to accept the idea that there should be a Jewish something in biblical Israel. We're thrilled. Unfortunately, things on the ground start making the British change their minds. And what's going on the ground is that there is a clear majority of Muslims in this land who are not happy with this idea of a Jewish state in this, majority Muslim area. And they are starting to violently protest against these ideas. We see attacks on the Jews. The British are not really helping out the Jewish people at this stage, and the Jews have to protect themselves. This is when underground movements of the Jewish people start to rise. We start with just people who want to protect the farmers in the area that are being attacked, and then we start seeing militia groups, underground groups that understand that the British are not in our corner anymore. And some of these groups are going to want to fight the Arabs. Some of these groups are going to want to fight the British. Two Jews, three opinions. We can't agree on anything, really. So we're even fighting each other a little bit about how to achieve the goal of creating this Jewish state somewhere. And then World War II happens. Now, fighting is put aside. The British are actually looking for allies because Hitler and his armies are making their way through Northern Europe towards Palestine. So they need allies in this area, and they start training the Jewish people who are going to hopefully volunteer with the British. It doesn't happen at the end of the day. We don't really fight. The German forces are stopped before they reach Palestine, but this is the beginning of being actually trained. We got British training for some of our Jewish members in the land of Israel. We did have a few Jews that flew in on missions into Europe during World War II trying to help out. There are a few famous stories about these individuals. But the British, once the Germans were stopped, then the British obviously dismantled this idea, and the Jews picked it up. This is where the Haganah comes into play. This is the largest of the underground movements. And later on, when Israel is going to become an official state, the Haganah, the word Haganah, which means defense, is the major part of the Israeli defense forces. This is where the name comes from the IDF. So this is going to be eventually the official military of the Jewish state. So World War II, the British and the French lose heavy losses. And at the end of the war, they go to, now it's going to be the United Nations, no longer the League of Nations. Now they call themselves the United Nations. And they tell the United Nations, listen, we are leaving. Not just Palestine. Every place the British troops are outside of Britain, we're packing it in. Same with the French. And the United Nations starts sending delegations to all of these places that the French and the British are in control of. And these delegations return to the United Nations with a proposition of what needs to be done. The United Nations is going to vote. And this is how independent countries are suddenly formed. Egypt is going to get its independence. Jordan, I think in 1946, don't quote me on this, gets its independence. Pakistan and India, UN delegations were sent there, returned, and they voted on it. And then there was a few delegations that came to Palestine. And one thing was clear to these delegations. The local population here, which is mostly Jews and Muslims, cannot live under one area. Just not going to happen. So what do? The United Nations delegations had a partition plan that they offered, in which the Jews are going to get a piece of the land, the Muslims are going to get a piece of the land, but even the delegations didn't know what to do with Jerusalem. How do we split Jerusalem? Do we give it to the Jews? Do we give it to the Muslims? We already talked about the importance of Jerusalem for the Muslims with the Dome of the Rock at the top of the Temple Mount, the importance of it to the Jews. What do we do with it? And they decided basically not to decide. They decided we're going to keep this under UN jurisdiction. It's going to be an international area run by the United Nations with UN troops in the city of Jerusalem. And since these UN troops will need reinforcements and supplies, which mostly will come from Europe, we need a port close to Jerusalem, and the closest port we have is Jaffa. So the cities of Jerusalem and Jaffa and the road between these two cities is going to be an international area run by the United Nations, and about, a little bit under 50% will be for the Jewish people, and a little bit under 50% will be for the Muslim state. They can call it what they want at the end of the day. The Jews are listening as the vote in the UN is taking place. Clear majority. I think it was about 33 or something like that in favor, 11 or so against. A few countries abstained, a couple of countries abstained, doesn't matter. It was the first time that Russia and the United States voted the same way. You both voted yes to the partition plan, to the splitting of the land into these three different categories for completely different reasons, by the way, but we're not going to get into that right now. And the Jews in the land of Israel hear about this partition plan, and they go out celebrating in the streets. Unbelievable. It's not everything that the British promised us at the end of World War I. They promised us both sides of the Jordan River. It's even less than a quarter of what was promised to us. But Ben Gurion, and he's the leader of the Jewish people at this point, says a little bit is better than nothing. We accept. After 1900 years that the Jews are small minorities within the larger non-Jewish world outside of the land, outside of the promised land, the world accepts the idea that there should be some kind of a Jewish country, a Jewish state in the land of Israel. We accept. The Muslims are listening to the same vote, of course, and they're saying, pardon my French, what the heck are you talking about in that UN vote? Are you insane? Just look at the numbers. We have 1.1 million or so Muslims living in this land. We're talking 1947 right now. In the land, maybe 600,000 Jews. But zoom out a minute from Palestine and look at the surrounding area. And we had, back in those days, 1947, we had Jewish communities living in Iran and in Iraq and all the Arab world. So if you zoomed out of the area of Palestine, you would have seen 1.1, 1.2 billion with a B. 1.1, 1.2 billion Muslims. And add all the Jewish people that lived in those Arab countries, maybe you'll get to 1.5 million Jews. Why should there be a Jewish anything in the heart of the Muslim world? And based on the promises of all these new countries surrounding Palestine that just got their independence, that once the British forces leave, they will attack and give all of this land to the local Muslim population. The Muslim population of the land here said, we don't accept the United Nations partition plan. And this is when the war of, as far as Israel is concerned, this is the war of independence. The partition plan is off the table. And when Ben Gurion said a little bit is better than nothing, now he's changing his tune. Let's try and grab everything we can. It's a war. We're going for it. The first 6 months or so, until May 1940, we're talking November 1947 until May 1948. So approximately 6 months. These first 6 months is a civil war. The local Muslim population against the Jewish population. The British are still here. Just because a country declares that they're leaving an area doesn't mean that the following day the soldiers are out. It took the United States quite a while to leave Afghanistan, for example. It took them years once the decision was made. It doesn't take the British years. It takes them about 6 months. After the United Nations decision to partition the land and the war begins, 6 months, they're leaving on May 15th, 1948. Now, until May 15th, 1948, the Muslim countries surrounding Israel don't dare to attack. They might send reinforcement, they might send supplies, they might send weapons and ammunition to the local Muslim population, train them, but they're not attacking with their soldiers. And then a day before the British are supposed to leave, we're talking May 14th, 1948, which just happens to be a Friday, by the way. I think it was at 4 p.m. Invitations were sent to only about 300 guests. We decided to declare an independent state. We have no idea what the borders are going to be. We don't know if we're going to survive. The United States hears that the plan is to declare a state, and they're telling us, don't do it. Because if you do that, there's absolutely no way that the Arab countries are not going to attack you. Ben-Gurion sticks to the plan, and he tells the United States, my friends, they're going to attack us no matter what we do. We're going to declare this state right now. And a day before the British left, in Tel Aviv, by the way, not in Jerusalem because it's under siege. In Tel Aviv, they meet the heads of the state, and aside from the 300 guests that were invited, almost everybody could make it there. Got there, and in a ceremony that lasts maybe 32 minutes, we are declaring an independent Jewish state in the land of Israel. Word in is very important. As I said, we don't know what the borders are going to be and if we're going to survive. First ones to congratulate us, the United States. Even though you warned us not to do it, you definitely congratulated us, at least the first ones. Ben-Gurion finishes the declaration and goes back to handling the war. He is now, as far as we're concerned, the prime minister, the minister of defense, and the chief of what do you call it? The chief of the military.
Yeah. So the commander
in chief of the
military, basically.
This guy doesn't really have any background, so he's learning on the job. Everything.
On the job. Yeah.
And the war is going to take the next level because the British actually leave the following day, and that is when the Egyptian planes are flying over Tel Aviv, bombing Tel Aviv, and we are now facing an invasion. Not just of our neighboring Arab countries. I'm talking about what we call Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. They actually have a border with Israel. We have troops from Iran, troops from Iraq, troops from Saudi Arabia. Some people say even from Yemen. 6 to 8 Arab countries are going to attack Israel. And when we're talking about overcoming the odds, this is it. Whether it's the hand of God, or whether it's because we were better prepared, we survived that invasion. This is the longest war that Israel goes through. This is without a doubt the heaviest toll that Israel suffered in terms of casualties. 1% of the Jewish population was killed in this war. But when we finally signed a ceasefire agreement, not a peace treaty, but we did sign ceasefire agreements with our neighbors, Israel is a fact on the ground. And despite what the United Nations thought that the partition plan was supposed to be, we got quite a bit more land at the end of this war than what the United Nations thought. The local Muslim population got nothing. Okay? And that was the situation at the end of the war in 1949. So about a year and a half after the war begins, we're finally at some kind of a standstill. And modern-day Israel is not a consecutive piece of territory. It's actually divided because of the events of 1949 and the way that we signed the ceasefire. Some of the ceasefire agreements were signed not by the politicians, but even before the politicians got together, it was commanders in the field that said, we need to make a pause here. We need to take the bodies out of the battlefield. We need to attend to our troops. And they had between themselves, they came to some kind of a ceasefire. They didn't think for a second that this is going to be the line of that the politicians will sign on. And what happened? Let's take Jerusalem as a case. We were fighting, and let's say my hand is Jerusalem. We had troops here, and they were surrounded by Jordanian troops. The Jordanians had troops here surrounded by the military of Israel. No one thought for a second that this is going to be the line of truce that was formally going to be signed. And it's kind of like Swiss cheese. And when you look at the line that we signed up between the Jordanians and the Israelis, it doesn't go like this, splitting it in half. It goes like this, all over the place. Really like Swiss cheese. Now, because the modern-day country of Jordan is on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, they had troops on the west bank of the Jordan River when we signed that truce agreement with them, that ceasefire agreement with them. And they simply called the area that they controlled militarily the west bank of the Jordan River, and in short, what everybody now today knows as the West Bank. This is a name to a section of the land that is coined in 1949 by the Jordanians, the West Bank of the Jordan River, in short, the West Bank. Now, the Egyptians control the city of Gaza. This is on the Mediterranean coastline, on the western side of the land of Israel. And it's very close to the border with Egypt itself. They had military occupation, military law enforced on the population of the city of Gaza, but also a little bit to the north of the city of Gaza and a little bit to the south of the city of Gaza. And this is what we call today the Gaza Strip. It wasn't official Egypt. They did not give citizenship to the local Muslim population that lived there. They kicked out any of the Jews that were there. So when we're signing a ceasefire agreement, whether it was Jordanians or whether it was the Egyptians, what's happening is the Jews that used to be there were kicked out. Or they said, you can stay here, but we'll kill you, kind of. So any Jewish population that was anywhere in that area when we signed a ceasefire moved into what would be the official state of Israel. And that's the situation from 1949 until 1967. We have the Gaza Strip militarily controlled by the Gazans, by the Egyptians. We have what's referred to as the West Bank, controlled by the Jordanians. And this is interesting because the West Bank is on the west bank of the Jordan River, but it's the east side of the land of Israel.
Yes.
That sometimes confuses people. But that's the situation for the next, give or take, 18 years. And then everything in between this area called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, that's the state of Israel. And if you look at it, there are places where the width of Israel is roughly 6 miles from the Mediterranean to this line called the West Bank, the line that we signed with the Jordanians, maybe 6 miles. That's the width of the country at that point. And of course, there's Syria in the northeast of the land of Israel. They are in complete control of their country, which includes what we call today the Golan Heights. There's a big geographical area in the northern part of the land. 1967 comes around. We have another war. It's called the 6 Days War, even though it lasted a little bit into the 7th day. We still call it the 6-Day War. And in the 6 Days War, Israel triples its size. And this really becomes the point of distinction between what we call in Israel left and right politics. The way we describe what happened, the words we use to describe what happened, and what we think is the right future for the state of Israel to go with, that is the difference between left and right politics in Israel. It has nothing to do with American politics. It has nothing to do with gun control. It has nothing to do with abortion issues. It has nothing to do with socialism and capitalism, big government, small government, almost nothing like that. You can be a capitalist on the left. You can be pro-gay on the right. You can be religious on the left. You can be religious on the right. It has nothing to do with it. And of course, we're painting it in very, very broad strokes. But if I were to say, as an Israeli, in 1967, Israel conquers the Golan Heights. Israel conquers the Sinai Peninsula. Everybody agrees. Sinai Peninsula is a part of Egypt. Egyptian citizens live there. Golan Heights, part of Syria. Syrian citizens live there. nobody contests that Israel conquers. That word is very important. Conquers those places. Now, if I say that Israel conquers the Gaza Strip and Israel conquers the West Bank, and in order for there to be some kind of an agreement, peace, whatever word you want to put in there, Israel will have to give back these territories, then I'm a left-wing Israeli. Because I said that Israel conquered the Gaza Strip, conquers the West Bank, and needs to return, give back these territories to the Palestinians. That makes me a left-wing Israeli. Words matter. Mm-hmm. If I am on the right wing, I would say, yes, we conquered the Golan Heights. Yes, we conquered the Sinai Peninsula. But we liberated the Gaza Strip. And then I'm going to say we liberated, not West Bank, we liberated Judea and Samaria. As a right-wing Israeli, I would give that territory the biblical name Judea. 2,000 years ago, when the Romans were here, they called it Judea. Why? Because the Jews lived there. And if the Jews lived there, how can I conquer something that was mine? Obviously, I am liberating that area. Now, if I'm a pragmatic right-winger, I always say, listen, in the Gaza Strip and in this area that what I call Judea and Samaria and someone else might call West Bank, there are over 3 million non-Jews. If I give them citizenship in my country, there goes the majority of Jews that the state of Israel is enjoying right now. Mm-hmm. That will defeat the entire purpose of having a Jewish state. So I'm willing to give. And here is another difference between right and left. I'm not willing to give back. The word back is almost taboo in right-wing terminology. I'm willing to give some of this territory so that they can have a state of their own if truly that's what they want. If you're not a pragmatic but a more far-right person, you will say they never wanted a state of their own. And therefore, there's no need to give them anything. I don't know maybe what the right answer would be as a far-right person, because again, I don't want to give them citizenship, but if they don't want a state, then everything we've done so far is them trying to have me not have a state. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to give anything. It won't help anyway. They don't want a state of their own. So don't give them an inch. That's the far right. And again, this is very, very broad strokes that we're talking about. Left wing, we conquered, we need to give back. Right wing, we liberated. We're willing to discuss, if you want a state, how much we will give.
But we're not giving anything back because it was ours.
Back means that you took something from someone that doesn't belong to you, and therefore you need to give it back. That's why the word back is very problematic in right-wing politics in Israel. Now, we're not going into politics. I'm just trying to explain the differences and what the situation is. Now, in reality, what happened in 1967 is that instead of Egyptian military law over the people that live in the Gaza Strip area, we have Israeli soldiers with Israeli military law imposed on that area. And then for our use, we'll just talk about the West Bank. Instead of having Jordanian military law imposed on the population living in the West Bank, we now have Israeli soldiers imposing Israeli military law on that population. If you go back before 1949, before the Jordanians and the Egyptians were there, it was British military law over the entire area. And before that, it was the Ottomans, and before that, the Seljuks, and before that, the Christians, and before that, or the Crusaders, and before that the Muslims again, the Crusaders again, and the Muslims again, and the Christians again. If we're going back 2,000 years ago, it's the Roman military law. And the last time there wasn't any military law in this area was the Hasmonean period, the Maccabees, 2,200 years ago. So for over 2,000 years, there was some kind of military law. The question is, which military, what soldiers, what military law is imposed on the local population? And from 1967, it's Israeli military law. Let's continue just a couple of more.
Yep.
We got 1973, 6 years later. We have another war. It's called the Yom Kippur War. Nobody gained any ground. A lot of people died. Horrible war for the Israelis. We actually contemplated the use of nuclear weapons, and for those who didn't know until now, Israel has the capability. It started out very bad. It ended with us being basically in Cairo, the capital of Egypt, and almost at the gates of Damascus, the capital of Syria. But we withdrew to the original line, so nobody gained any ground there. But this is the war that Israel wasn't able to say clearly we won for the first time. We definitely won in 1948-9. We definitely won in 1967. The 6 Days War today is still being taught in different academies, military academies around the world, as a perfect executed war, how to execute the perfect war. But in 1973, we couldn't do that. And this is a wonderful point to actually pause, because the fact that we didn't win in 1973 makes all the difference in the next couple of decades as far as the political movement, the geopolitics of the region, which we'll dive into, I guess, in the next podcast. How's that?
Yeah, it's a good place to stop, because I know where you're going, and I think that our listeners will learn, probably enjoy as well, because this is going to help bring us up really kind of to modern times, because sometimes we don't understand the conflict there, and you hear things on the news and you're trying to put pieces together and you're just like, why can't everybody get along? And we oversimplify it as if it's just two people need to sit down at a table. Simplify. But we're going to have you maybe simplify it, just so that we can understand the tension and the conflict in broad strokes. So we'll continue that in what will be episode number 10. We'll be in episode number 10. Yes. And so we'll be back in April for episode number 10. But in the meantime, thanks again to the CHLS for taking trips. While we talk about some of the tension, we talk about some of the history with that. Right now, it's a great time to go and visit. It's a beautiful country. It's wonderful to see the sights, to meet the people, and to discover so much that the CHLS program offers, and people like Opher who teach there. So again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, CHLS, for the sponsorship, and we will resume OPHERcoming the odds with our 10th episode next month. We hope to see you back as we conclude, most likely,
we're definitely
overview of Israel.
Absolutely.
And then we'll share more about what's coming up in episodes 11 and 12 of our first season. But with that said, we'll see you next time. So hopefully you'll see us back soon.